10 more bold predictions for the fantasy football season. That is what we're going to cover here on RotoViz Overtime as we continue our way through a $125 FFPC tournament draft from the 101 and the quest for $300,000 at the top prize. So far, Shawn, we have loaded up on wide, hugely promising with 3 rookies in RJ Harvey, Travion Henderson, Jaydon Blue. We also have Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, JSN, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Olave, Jaden Reed at wide receiver. We have no tight end, so we've missed out on the elite tight end. That is going to be a concern the rest of the way as to how we manage that. Will be one of the key areas of the remainder of the draft. We have Bo Nix and we have Jordan Love as well at QBs. So Bo Nix on stack, Jordan Love with Jaden Reed. I'm very excited, Shawn, about this team in terms of how it is set up and how it is structured. Outside of the tight end position, we are in great shape, but we like to also be in great shape at the tight end position. So we'll see how we balance that the rest of the way. We did wrap up the previous episode where we did make selections of Jordan Love and Jaydon Blue while on the clock, but we didn't give our bold predictions for those. I kind of tied it in as we rushed through the Jaden Reed one and the way that the Packers offense can change direction in 2025 as we go with a healthy Jordan Love. We lean in a little bit more to the pass. We go away from the run. Even if it gets to like balanced, it went in such an extreme from the previous seasons. Matt LaFleur likes to be pretty balanced across the board in terms of how he runs the offense, but it did get to a almost comical degree, whether it was in the games that Jordan Love missed or if it was in the games where Jordan Love played, where it was like so heavily on the run game. So Jaden Reed in those situations, like not set up for success based on the fact that they just weren't passing the ball. We talked a little bit about the 2 wide receiver sets, but there's a lot of things, again, like we talked about with the Chris Olave selection, where these negatives, or even with the JSN pick, a lot of the negatives are factored in to where they're going at ADP. And I think it's very hard to look at Jaden Reed, even with what he did last year, and factor it into, if you even get what you got last year at the 8-12, you are really outshining that particular ADP. So Jordan Love, Shawn, is healthy this year, is ready to roll. How good can he be? The excitement level as a Packers fan really peaked when they got to the playoffs 2 seasons ago. They head into Dallas and they start that game off where they just like crushed the Cowboys early in the game and put up a huge number. And then they almost beat the 49ers on the way to the Super Bowl, but the 49ers come back obviously in that conference championship game. Can we get back to that Jordan Love? And then obviously that pairs this team in a supercharged way along with Jaden Reed's, post-hype breakout.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at a Jaden Reed selection and you don't have other QBs that are clear cut, it makes a lot of sense to make these bets together. The Packers, as you mentioned, just unbelievably dynamic over the second half of Jordan Love's sort of initial season as a starter. 2023, weeks 11 through 18, that's the full second half of the season, 8 games for them, averaged 24.5 points per game during that stretch. That's about what you would expect to get from someone like a Jalen Hurts, just barely below. I mean, you can compete with the hybrid QBs, not a Lamar Jackson, maybe not a peak Josh Allen or a peak Jaden Daniels, but Jordan Love is going to put you in position. One of the things that was so great about that stretch is that they were such consistently elite performances, but he is in a position as well where if you want one-offs, where you're having, 29, 26, 31, those types of individual weeks, especially with a Bo Nix, who we're also looking for that, Jordan Love is perfect, right? You're going to have some games that are extremely efficient, that you get these splash plays, that you get the long scores to a Jaden Reed. The upside there is immense. And as you said, I think that having the pricing really be with all of the negatives factored in and still being pretty good at that point, you've got to be excited about it. I don't think that you want to go out and just, really lean into Jordan Love as the foundation of your 2025 best ball strategy, but certainly he's someone that you should be mixing in if you like any of his individual receivers there. So we put that together, Colm, and I love to be able to get those guys together. It just makes the team here. One of the things I always have trouble with is forcing myself to get the QBs. I think having these receivers, these young running backs, and then the QB element, of course, what is the part you're missing when you have that? Well, obviously we're missing the tight ends. I think that we have an interesting path to address that doesn't really require addressing it at the 12-13 turn, which we are about to get to.
Yeah, we're about to get to it, and it does open up the door. I'm looking here to Trey Benson, who he goes. I'm going to stop sending him, Shawn, when we get 2 picks away, because they've gone each and every time. But Trey Benson, somebody who James Conner was hyping up over the last couple of days, and we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks in particular, looking at trying to add him to quite a lot of rosters after a very quiet rookie season. We are 1 pick away, Shawn. You mentioned like we might not have to address it at this particular pick. He was one of the names that we were looking at. The other one that I mentioned earlier, Guerendo, goes in this area. Any other names, non-QB or Ray Davis, maybe? Are you looking at the tight end position or after that pick happened, or are you looking at some of those running back names?
Well, it's interesting that just with a couple of practices, Luther Burden is just skyrocketing, but that wasn't the direction we needed to go in this draft anyway. Colm, I do think that Trey Benson pick really hurts us. It wipes out most of what we were legitimately looking at here. I think that the temptation then is to, peek back at tight end. We don't really see anything. I think the next step is to elevate some guys potentially at the running back position. What are your druthers here? This is pretty tricky.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking way down if we don't go Guerendo as the first pick or Ray Davis. Are you looking beyond that? Are you looking down to the kind of all the way down to our boys? Like, are you getting as far as Jarquez here?
And take Isaac Guerendo there. He is about a round's worth of value. And I think that's the right time to mix in some Guerendo shares. The next pick column, I think, could be absolutely anywhere. We are right back to this question of whether or not we're going to get James Cook playing.
Yeah.
And that does make Ray Davis pretty interesting here. He's probably the guy I would go with
Yeah,
if we stick at the running back position.
That's the way I would. I think that they are the 2 players in terms of like the way it would set up in this team, Guerendo and Davis, that I would take based on how we set at ADP. A lot of the names that, I mentioned about reaching down, but I was like looking then in the ADP queue and I'm like, these guys are like multiple rounds further down here that we will have a chance at them. The only reason that it also would make sense to possibly take them and pull them up at this point would be that it would factor into like, are they in the same areas? We're going to be looking at those tight ends that we're going to try and draft here in the next particular turn. And that would be kind of the decision there. Were you thinking about it from that perspective more so than, kind of a ADP perspective? Were you looking at it from the construction of if we were to pull them up, then we could potentially get like Sanders, Ferguson, those sort of names as well?
Well, I think if you pull those players up, you could just as easily pull up some of the tight ends. Now, we probably
Yeah.
have stronger preferences at the running back position, but part of what I'm thinking here, and I don't think that you necessarily need to go away from the rookie running backs if you have selected guys like Harvey and Henderson, where you're basically making the bet that they score big right away. I mean, I don't think that
Yeah.
you want to take RJ Harvey at the 412 unless
You
you
don't
expect
think so?
him to be a big scorer, right? Unless you expect his first month to also go well. That's not a pick where you're saying, oh, well, the fantasy playoffs, he's going to be dynamic. No, that needs to work well right off the bat. And if that's the case, and this is something I've talked about on a few shows at different points, is just that Blair's research would suggest that some of these, early running backs, and I think that guys like Harvey and Henderson would be even earlier in most drafts if they're not in the shadow of people like an Ashton Genty. But if you're making those picks, you need to be able to count on them. At the same time, I think that Guerendo and Davis are really nice complements because they give you that second year breakout potential as well. You give a little bit of that handcuff upside, where the handcuffed upside is absurd, right? If Christian McCaffrey goes down, and especially with what it sounds like Jordan James struggling a little bit, I think having some very minor health things going on, that I mean, Guerendo is going to score a ton of points. The same thing with a James Cook. If he holds out or suffers some injuries because he holds out or doesn't play as well, or just, they balance the offense a little bit more. I mean, Ray Davis could be that guy who goes for 10 plus touchdowns this season with the Bills. It's almost only those 2 players that you can play from the Bills' skill positions, and you probably wanna do it for the player who doesn't cost you that much. And where if you get it right, it's absolutely crushing to the rest of the league. Now you want to mix that in the right, overall uh, type of team framework where it's not expecting Ray Davis to carry you to the title by himself. But I think that this mix that we have here is just really a lot of fun. And so again, if you get into a flat spot where yeah, your preference was to take someone else, but if that's not really what we had available to us, then again, I think that's where you take a Ray Davis. Certainly that's where you take an Isaac Guerendo and you embrace the fact that they give you something a little bit different and something valuable for this particular team.
So you do get Ray Davis, Shawn, as a 10 plus touchdown scorer. I'll accept that as your bold prediction right there. But then we need to get back to Jaydon Blue. Beat reporters more positive. The early reports seem to be kind of almost dismissed a little bit. So we're all back in the Jaydon Blue's ready to roll train. But we pick him there at the 11:01. We have talked a lot this offseason about why to be excited about him. We kind of got to a point where we stopped talking about him because we were talking about him on every show. We haven't talked about him in quite some time. So the upside case here and him winning the backfield from Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams.
So the crazy thing here for Blue, my comp for him was Achane, and I don't expect him to do Achane things. That was just so extraordinary. But he's in a very similar situation as a back with some similarities. Now, Achane came in as a running back dominator guy. Blue is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and so in some ways you can say, well, Shawn, these guys are actually utterly different, not similar at all. But you have that speed, you have the ability to create the big plays. We got a 50-point game from Achane early in his rookie season. That'll be my prediction or my bold prediction for Blue. So we get a 50-point game from him this year. But I think the other part with him, and one of the reasons why we've built this team the way that we have, I did a big piece looking at how receptions are drying up from the running backs. And this team for us, and you think about how these receptions, if you have specific game scripts, could be bunched together, which would also be good for best ball. RJ Harvey, Travion Henderson, Jaydon Blue, those are three backs who could compete with an Alvin Kamara, could compete with an Achane to be the league leader in running back receptions right away. This is a team that should score a lot at the running back position through the receiving game. That really just separates them so much from almost anybody else who's available. I love that part. I can't give the same bold prediction that both of those guys will lead the entire position in receptions, but those receptions are going to lead to a massive spike week for Jaydon Blue.
We are 2 picks away. Jerome Ford gets selected. We have had 5 tight ends get drafted since we had our pick. So Brenton Strange, Zach Ertz, Mike Gesicki, Arreo of the Seahawks, and then Cade Otton. I was intrigued if Arreo got back that we would potentially talk a little bit about him. One that really would probably fit here, Shawn, based on just kind of having a little bit of a floor at tight end and having some potential spike week upside, maybe Chega Okonkwo. Last season towards the end, had a 14-point game, a 13.9 and a 19-point game, along with an 11-point game throughout those last kind of 5 weeks. So there would be, and he goes 1 pick before. Again, I've cursed it, Shawn. I shouldn't have said anything. I think we're bugged here. Somebody is checking in on the information. So we are back on the clock. The other tight ends, Pat Freiermuth, Darren Waller, aren't really all that appealing to me unless you want to push for it. The tight ends I like are Jatavian Sanders, Terrance Ferguson. They are going a couple of rounds later. They're going in a similar range where we could look at Jarquez Hunter, Brashad Smith as potential running back options. I also do think our need here on the team, being at tight end, would push me in that direction at this turn if we're looking to pull players up. Do those 2 veterans interest you first, and then who's your pitch here for this first pick?
Well, I think that Freiermuth is actually a
Okay.
must pick
Okay.
at this point, and we'll go into that in a little more detail after we make the second selection. Colm, I think for me, this is probably Hunter. I don't know that we need to take a second one of the tight ends. I think tight end back-to-back at the next turn is probably where we end up with it.
Yeah.
And so this is probably Hunter or Smith for me. End up getting a lot of Smith. He's interesting in that he has that Week 17 matchup with Knicks. Hunter is interesting in that he probably has a little bit more of a chance to be the superstar, and he has a different buy than our other running backs. Who's your preference there?
I'm going to let you have this one. I've stopped you on a few picks, and I know who your preference is here, Shawn. So I'm going to let you. I would go the other way, but you can take your preference if you want. No pressure. Shawn has he's the reverse psychology has worked here. Shawn, is Jarquez Hunter your preference, or is that because I kind of talked you into it in a roundabout way?
I mean, Hunter is the guy that I have been talking about as being this year's Bucky Irving,
Yeah.
sort of all along. And we've got a little bit of bye week overlap with Henderson and Isaac Guerendo. I think being able to get now to where we have the bye weeks so spread at the running back position, on top of having them so spread at the receiver position. I know it's a small thing, but I really like it. Jake had a great article on how that does help you last season. I think you try and add up those little edges if you're 50-50 on it. Now, I do think the other part of it is that if we think back to, what might win the tournament, it would be this Brashard Smith breakout game in week 17
And I
game
would agree
there.
that there is that possibility. But as I mentioned in this particular format, where it's like you're working your way through the 12 team pods, I believe it's 89 teams in the final. Having a unique stack as much as that probably isn't as necessary. Like if we're looking at the Chiefs, there's lots of ways they could score points if it's not Brashard Smith to set up a shootout for Bo Nix tossing the ball to RJ Harvey to set up some scores. So I do agree that would be beneficial, but there's also, it's not just a case that would have to be the Smith breakout. I've been drafting Hunter in all these situations over Smith, and I've been trying to get both of them where I can. But I just like Hunter's situation to. I think that he can. My bold prediction is that he's the starter in this offense by the end of the season. That's my bold prediction. I don't know if Shawn wants to go in a different direction, but I think that he's set up to overtake Kyren Williams this year. Can you give me something hotter, Shawn, or is that the bold prediction for Hunter?
No, I think that's very straightforwardly the case. I mean, to say he's simply better. I think that they're going to extend Kyren Williams. I think that Williams will be fine. I think they're going to extend him at a number where he can be a committee back. And I think you're going to see Jarquez Hunter is so good by midseason that he has to be the guy. He gives them a lot more of that Todd Gurley type of explosion. They need to be less plotting, right? If they want to get where they want to be as a franchise, if they're going to not just jump, but like convincingly put the 49ers in their place, win the NFC West, move on from a position of power. I mean, they've kind of had to position themselves recently. I mean, they had that really good run to end last season. They looked like they were potentially going to be a Super Bowl candidate out of the NFC. If they're going to leapfrog the 49ers, where the 49ers have been over the last 4 or 5 years, where they made a couple of Super Bowls, if they're going to establish themselves on par with the Philadelphia Eagles as the power teams in the NFC, the two teams who are really competing year in and year out to go to the Super Bowl, face those AFC powers like the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, you've just got to be better at the running back position. You have to have more of a Gurley threat. Now, I mean, Todd Gurley was so unique at his absolute peak that I don't think that we're looking at him and saying like Jarquez Hunter is going to be that. But Hunter is a guy who has borderline workhorse potential, is a good receiver, and is just so dynamic. And it's dynamic in a variety of ways where he can make people miss, he can break tackles, he has the long run capability. We talk a lot about some of these bigger backs who play like small backs and how that can be a positive. I think that Hunter plays like a bigger back, and that can be a positive for him, right? And so when you're trying to create the splash plays that this Rams offense needs and appears to have really emphasized over this offseason, I mean, Hunter is that guy. And even though you have Colm there as well, who's also potentially good, if Hunter is able to beat out Williams, it's a different situation than Brashard Smith, where if he emerges, you're probably going to see him alongside whoever sticks as the bigger back because they have multiple options. Because if Pacheco gets hurt, it's probably still Elijah Mitchell or Kareem Hunt. If Mitchell ends up going out, as he usually does, you still have a Kareem Hunt there. I think that the path to him having just the the true 3-down workhorse role probably isn't there. For Brashard Smith, you're kind of hoping that he can be the Achane to a Raheem Mostert, and the offense functions that way. If you were able to do that, then he would score a ton of points. You wouldn't need to be the guy, but you're hoping for maybe a little bit more specific type of outcome. But again, I mean, both of those outcomes are pretty appealing, right?
We do miss out on Jatavion Sanders, who goes at the 1601. But Shawn, we didn't miss out on Pat Freiermuth. You said we would expand on that particular case. It's now him and Johnny Smith in the Steelers offense. He goes to us at the 1412. Hit me with, you don't have to go like over the top. Hit me with the reasoning for, being you called it a must-make pick at that particular point. Obviously, we had no tight ends to this point. Is he going to give us a safe floor with some potential ceiling in play there?
I mean, he was a borderline tight end one as a rookie. He comes back in year two and doesn't score as many points, but is the tight end 7. He has an injury plagued season in year 3, but then comes back last year as the tight end 9. And now he's going to get a real QB. I mean, we've had our issues, and especially I've had my issues with Aaron Rodgers, but this is a team where you got a viable QB and you have basically nothing else, right? People don't really think that DK Metcalf is going to be that great of a fit with Rodgers. They have nothing at receiver other than Metcalf. They now have Jonnu Smith. But one of the things that Ben has really emphasized is this idea that, I mean, Freiermuth will still be basically the guy in the same way that Smith, was the secondary receiver previously when he was with Arthur Smith. And the Steelers themselves, the reporting coming out of there is that Freiermuth is, I believe the quote was like the heartbeat of the offense. When you have an offensive focal point at a position that we need and not a lot of other great options, basically it just becomes very clear that we have to have him as a little bit of a foundation to build the rest of this group around.
So speaking of the foundation, we now have that. We're one pick away. Players in the queue, we have Darren Waller, Terrance Ferguson, Colm, Harold Fanning, Ben Sinnott as options here at the tight end position. Adam Thielen went. So we're on the clock. Based on how we're setting up this tight end, is it a case like we're looking at this roster and sometimes we're looking at in the flex spot having potentially 2 or 3 tight ends based on how the team is set up and doing throughout the course of the season? This team is not really going to be that. So are we looking to just have a kind of a floor situation, or are we looking to swing for the fences with those rookies to gain that upside?
I think it would be a swing for the fences, either with the rookies or with Waller. I don't have a strong preference. I think that we want to take 2 of those 3 players. I really like the rookies, and I think by playoff time, they may give us more than Waller would give us. I mean, he's really a complete black box. We have no idea what he's going to provide this year in Miami.
Yeah, the one thing with the Waller pick is like there's a chance that the others, like one of the others, then comes back if we wanted to do it that direction. If we want to get up to the 4, do you want to get up to that, or do you want to, like Harold Fanning is usually by ADP like somebody who you may be able to get when it comes back in a later round here if you want to take Waller and try and get Fanning later.
So let's go ahead and do Waller. We have Waller there with Tyreek Hill. So we're betting on a bit of functionality from this team. This is not one of those teams where you're like, okay, if the Dolphins completely go away, we're fine. We don't want that to happen. We want to have this as a viable offense. I like that uh, point that you have made that we can put Fannin with them. It will be a situation where if we do get Fannin later, we'll have, again, 4 different buys covered by those tight ends. We'll have different types of thesis, which with each of the tight ends. And, we want to get to the 4 tight ends anyway in this format. It's not something where I'm leaning into this type of tight end strategy in 2025. I don't think that you want to. But when you have the 101, if you don't get Kittle back to you in 2, which we didn't buy a couple of picks, if you don't
Yeah.
get Laporta back to you in 4, which we didn't buy 1 pick, then, I mean, you almost have to make a big reach. And if you have other guys you like, you probably don't want to make that reach. Hawkinson ends up going on the far opposite side of the board in most drafts, kind of at the 5-6 turn, as opposed to where we are with the 4-5 and the 6-7. You get into a situation where if Tucker Kraft doesn't come back to you, you just end up with this type. And I do think that this year, while it's not particularly compelling from, say, tight end 13 on. He's Colston Loveland. Then you get to Jake Ferguson. You have Goddard, Pitts, Henry, Mason Taylor, Likely, Smith. Especially that sort of round 10 and 11 range is pretty gross. I don't think that there's any reason to reach for a Zach Ertz or a Brenton Strange. And again, I'm not saying that none of these guys will score, but just in terms of balancing the price and what likely scenarios are, what your projection is. Certainly a Mike Gesicki, now that he has Noah Fant on top of him. The Arroyo one is more fun because they do seem to like him enough that they're already opening things up for him. With that decision to cut Fant, I mean, Kate Otten just buried by how many receivers they have. I would have really liked for Okonkwo to have made
Yeah,
it
I thought that
one
would have been
pick. I
fun.
think, yeah, if we could have gotten 14, 15 of Okonkwo and Freiermuth, then you come back with Ferguson and Fannin late,
Yeah,
and you're
yeah.
really very well set up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the Conquo one is something that, like, he's kind of showing that athleticism and showing some highlight plays. But I think when we're looking at how we talked about some of the offenses and, the part one of this draft and the show that came out earlier this week, we were talking about like Judy, Olave, JSN. Even if we go down as far as reading the Packers, like the step forward that Cam Ward could have with that offense opens up potential path for a Conquo as well to have a little bit of a breakout. We do have some time, Shawn. We have 15 picks to go now, 14 before our next selection. We haven't yet talked about our 12th round pick, Isaac Guerendo. Obviously, we have Christian McCaffrey's behind him. You did touch on some of the potential benefits of how this offseason is setting up for him, but Guerendo, somebody who we were drafting pretty much in every draft and like between the 18th and 20th rounds last year. Obviously, we hope Christian McCaffrey stays fully healthy for the season. What's the upside in a Guerendo playing alongside McCaffrey season?
I'm going to go with the fun one on this. We know that he ripped off a bunch of long runs last year, which made him very efficient despite not having good evasion metrics. People can get caught up on that. Your ideal running back is someone who has blazing speed and simultaneously posts elite evasion metrics. That was never that likely to be the case with Guerendo. His background didn't suggest that, but his size speed combination is crazy. And then you saw that with the 49ers, who are going to create running lanes, right? If you have a player with that much speed and there's going to be a lane for them to run through, then you don't get caught very easily. So my prediction for Guerendo is going to go off of the fantasy map a little bit and say that he has 3 of the top 20 times in
Okay.
ball carrier speed for the 2025 season.
It's a pretty fun one to go in a slightly different direction. Shawn, I want to make a call out here for this draft room. And there's a team in 12 and it's called Big Yellow Joint. And I am pretty convinced they must be, in here somewhat in terms of some RotoViz content. They did draft Harold Fanning way ahead of ADP there at the 18-1, but they took Cole Kmet, they took Tavion Sanders, Will Shipley, Kyle Williams, Marvin Mims, Dylan Sampson, Tootin, Brock Purdy, but they take Tyjae Spears, Jalen Warren, Juwan Jennings, Travis Hunter, Zay Flowers, Xavier Worthy. But they started off, Shawn, with what might be something that Shawn Siegele would love to do with a H-Can, Trey McBride, Jaden Daniels, Xavier Worthy, 4-round run to start things off. So if Big Yellow Joint in the 12th spot is a listener to RotoViz OT, do reach out and let us know. But there's a couple of times, Shawn, where listeners may have seen the board is in a very different area. Our selection is well away, and I've like tilted my head back, been like, "Oh no, that guy is off the board." Harold Fanning doesn't make it back to us, so that is disappointing. We are looking here now, and they also get to the 4 tight ends that we often talk about being very successful in this tight end premium format, because they have those 3 guys laid on paired with Trey McBride. But Shawn, as we get ready to get back to us, do you want to go with Terrance Ferguson or Darren Waller first for a hot take here? Darren Waller, rap career seems to be going pretty well, but obviously thinks I'll come back. I get away from the Giants. I get an opportunity to get some sun down in Florida. What's the upside here for Darren Waller? Can we get back to some of those? He was somebody obviously has had his, I'm joking, but he's had his off the field issues with addictions and things, and has really, had a really strong NFL career from that point. But we don't see a lot of retirements, players coming back and then, hitting the ground running from that perspective.
No, we don't tend to get a lot
And
of
if I
that
remember
noticed.
correctly, Shawn, just to joke, the last time we drafted Darren Waller together, I believe was last off season, and I think 6 hours later, I joked on the recording that he was going to announce his retirement, and then he retired shortly after we drafted him. So hopefully he stays around this off season.
Don't bring that up. That was rough. I think and my recollection of that draft column is that I was like, he's going to retire. And you're like, my prediction is he's going to retire. And then you were like, but we still need to take him here. And is that what it was, or am I making that up? Because
I don't know which one we can blame, but that was kind of what happened. I don't know who made the decision. I think Shawn was at the controls.
that's another way to
What's he
bring
going to
that
do
there.
this year? Can we get him to 7 touchdowns? 500 yards.
Well, Colin, it sounded like you wanted to make a prediction based on his music career, which I had no other information about.
That's what you miss out, Shawn. One of the positives, you're not on social media, but you do see clips, and it's a bit better than you would anticipate it is. But I don't think you need to search it out and download it to listen alongside.
So you don't have Grammys or something like that as the prediction for Darren Waller.
My prediction for Darren Waller is after this is over, Shawn's going to click into Google and find out what this track sounds like. So that's our bold prediction for Darren Waller. I'm going to go and say that he gets 7 touchdowns this season. That would be very good for a 17th round tight end. We've seen Johnny Smith. If he can get anywhere near that, I'm not expecting the same usage, but that will be fun. Shawn, we missed out on Harold Fine, all joking aside, which was very upsetting at the time. Somebody we've talked about, possibly been sprinkled into these situations, and maybe we should be taking a second year look at, along with Jayden Daniels, is Ben Sinnott. We are going to have 3 picks left. Is there any players here that you're intrigued by, that outside of the 2 names in our queue?
Well, I think that Keenan Allen should be gone. So I have added him. I think that we have to take Sinnott on for one of these picks because he gives us that chance to have not to the same level because Trey McBride was extraordinary and he blew up in a huge way, but that similar arc to where the team that has Zach Ertz wants to play him, thinks that that's somehow the answer. Been talking a lot this offseason about Jayden Daniels and how they really haven't given him the weapons unless some of the young guys come through. When you're in the tight end situation we're in, you need to be willing to create some exposure to that path at this price. So I've clicked on him, call him Trevor Etienne, Keenan Allen, the 2 guys that we still
Well,
have
I
in here,
think
in part because, go ahead.
no, I was going to say I would risk taking Allen here and see if Etienne, I've joked about a lot, is one of them players that tends to roll through here undrafted through 20 rounds. So I would risk that he could come back to us potentially. Allen, somebody who I would expect it to have moved up a little bit. So we get him at the 1901. Shawn, certainly not a player that we've talked about this offseason. So we'll get a bold prediction on Keenan Allen in just a moment. Ben Sinnott, though, if we're talking about him, you're looking at the breakout. We drafted him a lot last year too, and it ended up to be a 0 play. But you're looking at a situation where we're building out a tight end room, and I used the phrase a few moments ago, swinging for the fences. Ben Sinnott certainly fits the profile of swinging for the fences. You're looking for the athletic upside to be able to make a real difference. And in this area of the draft, you don't want to waste any picks. But if you look through here, rounds 15 through 20, there's going to be a lot of these picks that amount to very, very little in 2025. And I would rather be taking those big shots on the likes of a Ben Sinnott than passing up and going in a kind of what might be seen as a slightly safer floor play. You want to be hitting some of the ceiling here. The downside is usually he is a player who could potentially go undrafted or is going in the kind of 20th round of this particular format. But I'd rather have a Harold Fanning obviously over him, but he does get drafted, so we know the rules. You can't draft the same player twice. Shawn, give me a bold prediction here for Keenan Allen. Is it that his rap music is better than Darren Waller?
Well, Colin, I am not 100%. So I've had Keenan Allen ranked way above ADP all offseason and have drafted, not a huge amount, but not an insignificant amount either. You look at through week 17 last year, and he was averaging more targets per game than DJ Moore. I think he did get clipped if you add week 18 in there. But the yards per game right there with more touchdowns per game, the better target share. That's not to say he had a great season, right? But when you contrast where he's going versus where DJ Moore is going, where he's going to Odunze, whom he crushed. And again, these are different profiles. The air yards profile for Odunze and Allen last year, very, very different. What you're going to get as a breakout. I'm certainly not saying that he should be valued anywhere in the range of those guys, but I think that there's this perception that he did nothing last year, which isn't remotely true. And then you look back to the 2023 season and he lit the world on fire. So we have some perception issues with Allen based on the injuries that he's had, the fact that there was all this negative rhetoric about his size last year, which again, he went out and drew targets like it was nothing. He was less affected by the poor QB play from Caleb Williams than the bigger names were. And Colm, he was the wide receiver 3 in terms of points per game just in 2023, the overall wide receiver 3. So if you look at that, and so the big yellow joint takes Trevor Etienne as we're chatting. Colm,
Certainly. I need to know who that is, Shawn. I need to know.
I mean, Keenan Allen, if he is on an NFL team this year, this is a pretty good price.
Yeah, I had pulled up the Stat Explorer, and last season, like you mentioned, there is games in there where they're like sub 7 points, sub 10 points, and there's quite a few of them. There's a wide receiver 3 or worse 54% of the time, but he has a 21-point game, 23-point game, 24-point game, 20-point game, 29-point game. And you mentioned the season before where he's like, has 46-point game, 40.5, and obviously he's getting older, so those things may not be replicable. But at this particular point, yeah, I think that it's another play. There's a couple of plays here, Shawn, that we've taken where we're like going for some ceiling outcomes, and Allen won't be, I don't think, a consistent week-to-week ceiling outcome for a roster like this, but maybe beneficial in some of those weeks where you need fill-ins, bye weeks, and so on. So we are not going to get Trevor Etienne, Shawn, who we did mention that we would like to see getting back in this, and he's somebody, as I mentioned, that often goes undrafted. So we will have a different selection and 8 picks for Mr. Irrelevant. Before we get to that, we do need a bold prediction for one Terrance Ferguson, who you talked about post-draft as the Rams' George Kittle.
So, Colin, for Terrance Ferguson, we need him to immediately make that jump to being Kittle, and not even the version of Kittle that was the real NFL version, but the year 2 version where he quickly jumped up to be the overall tight end 3, scored 260 points without the premium scoring, obviously scored a bunch more on top of that. With Ferguson, we have this really exciting combination of athleticism, ball in his hands ability. He's someone who comes in with more of a receiving background than a lot of even the breakout tight ends do. He was used in college quite a bit. I think he gets overlooked, and justifiably so, by a Tyler Warren, a Colston Loveland, a Harold Fannin. I mean, certainly Loveland was so good on a per play basis, and Warren and Fannin just combined to put up such insane overall production that it's easy to forget about or just overlook a season from Ferguson where he has an appendectomy in October. He still gets almost 600 yards. He's up at 2.5 yards per route run, which again, this is one of those things where Colston Loveland looks very good from a yards per route perspective, from an individual play perspective, but Ferguson has a lot more overall production and is also doing that. Ferguson had a great yards per route number back in his sophomore season. He had a senior year where he adds more air yards to his portfolio. 22 and 23, he's got really good tackle evaded numbers. And then again, when you add a 4.63 40, 92nd percentile explosion, you're trying to find these difference making athletes at the tight end position. And I think those early guys may not be it as much as people are hoping, right? It's not that I think those players won't be good, but you sometimes hear about, Colston Loveland as, say, a rich man's Sam Laporta. I don't know that we have really very strong reason to believe that. Now, Elijah Arroyo is someone that we know has big time athleticism. He had a play last year at college where he hit almost 22 miles per hour. But when you look at all of it together, I mean, Ferguson is the athletic gem in this class. And I mean, he's got some production to back that up. Now, can he jump Tyler Higbee fast enough to actually be an impact player this year? I think that's the hard part. You're probably looking more for late season impact from him. So I mean, we may be really relying on, again, that Freiermuth, and then hoping that Darren Waller really is a thing, which is certainly not the way we're drafting most of our teams.
I think that's a very fun outlook for Terrance Ferguson. Shawn, we did have a little bit of an impromptu conversation as we had to dive in for that last pick for Mr. Irrelevant. Hopefully he will be relevant for us. We did jump into some news, recovery news, and so on. So people watching on video will see that our last pick jumped forward, and they'll have been able to see that it was Taysom Hill. Shawn, Taysom Hill on this roster, I think, is very interesting. We have now, as we mentioned, at the tight end position, Pat Freiermuth, Terrance Ferguson, Darren Waller, Ben Sinnott. We've added in Taysom Hill to get up to 5 because we like to get to 4 in this format. But because we had to wait so long, adding another one in there at that last particular pick, we were at 2 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 7 wide receivers, and 5 tight ends. We get to the 7 wide receivers, the Keenan Allen pick. Don't really need to go any further. Pretty strong overall with the 4th and 5th round picks, even though they are rookies. And RJ Harvey and Henderson allowing us to stick with the 6 that we really like there at the running back position. And then we had 2 QBs in the window in the 9th and 10th round of Bo Nix and Jordan Love. So we kind of had a luxury pick at the end of the draft, and we go with Taysom Hill. So we were looking into the injury and the recovery, and that obviously tore his ACL in December. So there's a lot of potential for him to miss out either on a huge chunk of the season or all of this season. But he has been somebody who, when he's on the field, the Saints have tended to use quite considerably. But this thing that Shawn pitched, and this can fit in, Shawn, to the bold prediction, I think, because Shawn's final pitch was he could be there for the playoffs. And if you have a team that advances through and is in the playoffs or into week 17, you have Taysom Hill taking those 5-yard carries that everyone who doesn't have Taysom Hill on their roster absolutely despises into the end zone for touchdowns. Shawn, Taysom Hill, the true tight end league winner when it really matters this season. Is that the bold prediction?
Well, he had a 43-point game last year. We know that he can go off. He's got a 34-point game in his background. This is probably not the way to do it. We talk about having holes in the roster. Even if you have Mr. Irrelevant, you want to get a little bit more out of it. I think that Ollie Gordon would have been interesting here. I think Isaiah Davis would have been interesting here. We talked a little bit about selecting Manor. One of the things that did jump into this draft a little bit is that if you have the last pick, you look at the entirety of round 20, and it's probably not guys that you really want. The only players late who were interesting, really do come down to Trevor Etienne at the 19-12. Someone like a Sean Tucker is a little bit interesting. I think you could make the case that Gordon should be drafted, that Davis should be drafted, that Manor should be drafted, and yet they're not must-have plays. This is a very specific type of team. And Colm, one of the reasons I enjoyed this draft so much was that it was a draft that had a different path and an internally coherent build that developed. We were able to do things a little bit differently to get that start with the 2 running backs and the 6 wide receivers, those 2 running backs coming in rounds 4 and 5. We got the 2 QBs in the window. I love that part of it. The 3 QB in the window will also work and gives you different advantages, right? So the results tend to be pretty similar. The advantages and disadvantages, the trade-offs in those 2 builds are different. And so you have to figure out how you want to build around that. We didn't get this big Kansas City part opposite Bo Nix. We discussed that a little bit when we picked Jarquez Hunter instead of Brashard Smith. I do like having Knicks on this team in this build. It would have been fun if either Franklin or Bryant had come back in round 18. Bryant, the more highly drafted player, but maybe losing a little bit of enthusiasm with that Sutton extension. It gives you less of a feel that Bryant will actually be that involved as a rookie. Franklin usually does come back, but he gets picked there. But one of the things that our stack explorers show is that in many cases, this QB with the elite running back functions in a similar type of way in terms of results, even though the specifics of how it functions is obviously different than when you stack that with one of the premier receivers from the team. Well, so you have Knicks, you have Jordan Love there. You love those parts coming together. The other thing, Colm, is that it doesn't tend to come into play that often, but the 5 tight end build in the FFPC is also something that the roster construction explorer, gives its seal of approval to. I think once you get here and you're looking at like how do we get both floor with someone like Freiermuth and then ceiling from some of these swing for the fences picks, you wouldn't want to get to 5 if you went through this in a different way and you had other must-have picks. You don't give that away just to get to the 5, but you also don't get caught up in, okay, I want to have these very specific things, and one of them is I want to get definitely to 4 but no more than 4 tight ends. That's not the way to look at it. We have that round 20 pick where maybe you get the guy who you had to have, and I think that Taysom Hill, basically you should never be drafting him unless you just don't really have any other path to the big time scoring. You're trying to figure out how you're going to match these other teams. Every other team had a tight end through through round 11. I was going to say through round 8. 10 of the other 12 teams, the other 11 teams, had one through round 8, with Tucker Kraft being the last of those. So this entire league ended up being very balanced at the tight end position. We don't see a ton of these where there are a bunch of picks being taken early by any individual squad. This has been so much fun because it allows us to do something that was a little bit different, but also something that was very targeted at how this specific draft played out, what our needs were, how we can create pathways to winning the entire tournament. I mean, if anything, it's probably the running back position we end up a little bit weak at because we have so many rookies, but the contingent upside of this team may be the highest of any team I've drafted this year. Colin, it might be the highest of any team that I've ever drafted in best ball. That also speaks to weaknesses from the team, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, and we're looking to win the tournament. Obviously, you want to advance through your grouping, but you want to win the tournament. We've been close a few times, Shawn. We've got all the way up to second. We haven't actually got over the finish line and got that first place yet in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. Maybe this is the team that does it, but there's a lot of upside, and you can tell yourself the stories as to how this works out. If tight end comes around for us here, I'm probably more confident in this running back room than some of the rooms that I would put together based on the fact that we have a 4th and 5th round running back rather than trying to stretch it out a little bit too much. But yeah, very exciting team to put together. A challenging draft, but I have to say during it was a fun draft to put together and to build out, as you said, a kind of different format for the roster. Shawn, I did do some research there while you were talking. I was able to go in and check the managers of this particular league, and I was able to find out that the drafter in 12 is none other than one Dylan, who has drafted in multiple listener leagues against us. So yeah, definitely I'm going to have to send a strongly worded email, Shawn. That's the only way I think that I can sort this out, and I'll be sharing a piece of my mind with Dylan, because that Harold Fanning pick, Shawn, I like Trevor Etienne, let the guy come back to us here. Let us have some fun. But yeah, really strong team, a lot of fun. And thanks to Dylan. I hope he had an enjoyable time drafting those as well. And I'm sure he'll get a good chuckle when he hears this part of the podcast back as well. But that is where we're going to close it out. We got to do those. I am recording tomorrow with Davis Maddock. You'll be able to hear that show when it is available. Both of those will be out by the time you're listening to this one. So head on over to the RotoViz Fantasy Football podcast feed to check that out. I will also, or you can also find the episodes that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. We had Matt Harmon on, and then last week we had Hayden Wink. So lots of great guests over the course of the summer. Head on back and check those out. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on social media at Overtime Ireland. You can check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com, where you can also sign up using the code RV2025 to get yourself a 10% discount off a RotoViz NFL Pass. And until we are back, have a good one.